Welcome to Modern Psychedelics, where we explore the transformations made possible through intentional engagement with psychedelics. This podcast will help you integrate high consciousness living into the everyday and deepen the work ignited by altered states. You can expect balanced and grounded conversations around therapeutic, ceremonial, and recreational containers. My name is Lana Pribic, your host and guide. I am a 3-time certified professional life coach, and I work with people who want to integrate higher levels of consciousness into their daily lives so they can feel more peace, fulfillment, and connection. After all, our time here on Earth is so brief, so let's make sure we're really living. The song you hear is called Lost Horizon by Peace Sign. All right, let's journey. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another guest interview episode. I'm really excited. Before I get into today's episode, I want to give you just a little bit of backdrop for the guest today. So once upon a time ago in, I don't know if it was 2019 or 2020, but before I started the Modern Psychedelics podcast, I was out there just like you, consuming all of the information that I could about psychedelics. And I loved to do that through podcasts. And back in the day, there was only really a handful of podcasts about psychedelics. And the leading one back then, who I'm pretty sure are still the leading psychedelic podcast and education platform, was Psychedelics Today. I was really inspired by Psychedelics Today to carve out my own voice and my own niche in the world of podcasting about psychedelics. While I absolutely loved what they were doing and I learned so much, I also saw that I could kind of do my own thing and put my own spin on these conversations about psychedelics. So Psychedelics Today as a podcast and platform have been just so inspiring to me on my journey. And I'm so excited that today Joe Moore, the CEO and co-founder of Psychedelics Today, is joining me for a conversation. And it was a really nice, laid-back, fun conversation between two people who are in the psychedelic podcasting space, who know a lot about psychedelics respectively in their own ways. And we got to dig into some really fun stuff. I really appreciated just how relaxed and laid back, yet brilliant Joe was during this conversation. So Psychedelics Today was founded in 2016 with Joe Moore and Kyle Bueller. So as CEO, Joe has co-created one of the planet's best-known psychedelic podcasts and training platforms, which is vital. We're going to get into that a little bit. He combines over 20 years of avid psychedelic study and training with over 20 years of experience in software and multinational project management. Joe is a leading expert in transpersonal breathwork, a board member of the Psychedelic and Pain Association and the Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, and a sought-after international speaker on the intersecting subjects of psychedelic medicine and healing, breathwork, drug policy, medical innovation, international justice, and environmentalism. So remember how I said that I felt that I could kind of carve my own niche and my own kind of conversations in the psychedelic space? Well, that's because a lot of what we talk about at Modern Psychedelics is based on my work as a life coach and applying personal development to psychedelics and working with psychedelics. Psychedelics Today, however, takes a much more kind of macro social cultural lens of psychedelics. They're kind of zoomed out a little bit, whereas Modern Psychedelics is a bit more focused on the individual. And it was so fun to kind of bring our platforms together for this conversation, because I would say that the theme of the conversation with Joe today was about psychedelics and society, psychedelics and culture. How do we bring psychedelic literacy to society at a large scale? Like, I'm talking much bigger than it already currently is. We talked about building safe cultural containers, some steps that we can take as individuals and society to do that so that people feel safe, not only doing psychedelics, but also talking about them, so that there's like this release of shame and need to hide one's psychedelic use. So we talked about that. That was a big part of it. We talked about the psychedelic underground, what the heck is going on there, why Joe and I are both proponents of the underground, but then also some shortcomings of the underground and ways that Psychedelics Today is addressing those shortcomings through their professional training. I loved picking his brain on how we can use psychedelics to combat global challenges. Joe is very much concerned with environmental issues, social issues. And so he gave us his 2 cents on how we can actually use psychedelics to move us forward as a society and solve problems. And then we also talked about Vital. So Vital, you may have heard of it before. It's Psychedelic Today's comprehensive training for psychedelic professionals. This is a 1-year training program that sounds like it could be a undergraduate degree in psychedelic education. And we talked about how that came to be, who it's for, and who might benefit from it. I really loved hearing how there's so many different diverse people in this training program. And I know a couple of people who have been through it as well. So yeah, stick around to the end for a conversation around that. It sounds like a program that is an amazing launching off point for people who want to get started in the industry and for professionals, whether they are clinical professionals, doctors, researchers, teachers, family doctors. It doesn't really matter. Anyone who is a professional and wants to weave psychedelic literacy into their work would benefit from this training. It sounds very high quality and comprehensive. So you can learn more about that by visiting the link in the show notes, Vital Psychedelic Training. So I think you're really going to enjoy this change of pace, this kind of zoom out into a more social and cultural lens and looking at psychedelics through this way while still really honoring and holding up the individual journey. So please share this with a friend if you think they might enjoy it. And I'm still looking to get 200 Spotify 5-star reviews. We're around 175 right now at the time of recording. So please take 2 seconds if you're listening on Spotify to scroll to the top of the Modern Psychedelics page. Click the 3 dots on the right-hand side and just hit 5 stars. It really, really helps the show rank and get out there, and it's free to you. So I really appreciate that. And then lastly, we're going into September now, and I am onboarding 2 new coaching clients into my practice. So if you have been curious about that, go ahead and fill out a coaching application, and that will just grant you access to book a curious conversation with me, where it's a no pressure conversation where we get to know each other and just figure out if coaching is right for you. So yeah, looking for 2 new people to come into my coaching practice for the fall and winter season. It's a really comprehensive 6-month deep dive transformational experience where we're going to be shifting your consciousness into a higher state of consciousness. And it's very much aligned with this work with psychedelics. And it makes a great prep and integration support system for you. So I look forward to hearing from you. And other than that, I just hope that you're enjoying the tail end of summer. Please take care of yourself, be good to yourself, and remember to, just stay on your path and keep going and be patient because good things are coming. All right, let's get into this episode with Joe. Hey, Joe, how is it going? Welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. It's going great today.
Amazing. I'm really excited for our convo, like podcaster to not even psychedelic podcaster to psychedelic podcaster, like 2 people who take very different angles. I think it's going to be a really fun convo. But can you introduce yourself to the audience and let people know what it is that you do in the space?
My name is Joe Moore. I'm a longtime interested party in the space. Started reading clinical LSD psychotherapy stuff from Stan Groff in 2001 pretty intensely, just blowing my mind. Now I'm the CEO, co-founder of Psychedelics Today, which is a leading education and media outfit based in Colorado, but we serve the whole world.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how far Psychedelics Today has been. I was just on the website yesterday, which I visited many times over the years, and I was just like, wow, we've got the podcast, blogs, Vital, oh my gosh, what else? Events. There's just so much that you guys are offering to the world. And I'm just curious about, man, what has that journey been like? Because you started the podcast in 2015 and it's just insane what you built.
I'm going to guess we might have fed you wrong information. May 2016 is what I remember. Kyle and I had been talking for a few years before that, and I'll give you a really quick and dirty history. I was doing a bunch of psychedelic organizing in Boston after I got out of my undergrad. Was trying to literally just find drugs, honestly, and find community around them that were going to say some interesting things. I was going to sleep every night with Terrence and Tim and Sasha and many of the other psychedelic luminaries in my ears, like every night. You know, I wasn't really perhaps the best employee for my first employer, and I was listening to psychedelic podcasts almost every day, all day long, as I was working. And so 8 hours a day at work, plus my commute, plus going to sleep with it. It was a really interesting immersion after doing so much holotropic breath work, you know, starting in 2003 till that time. And psychedelic organizing in Boston, started getting close with the burner scene there, and started producing events in an anarchist loft in Chinatown, which was really something, and had a lot of people come out, even had Graham Hancock make it there. We had all sorts of interesting mushroom grow workshops, and this is all like 2007, 8, and 9 maybe. I think I did some more in 10 before I left. And yeah, it was amazing. It was a really good time. And Kyle and I connected years later through our breathwork teachers in Vermont, Lenny and Elizabeth Gibson at Dream Shadow, and they were blown away that we didn't know each other. And then we decided, after trying to talk each other into going to grad school, he was trying to talk me into going, I was trying to talk him out of going to grad school. Neither of us were successful. And we decided we wanted to start a podcast because I had some experience podcasting before, and the intent being promoting the work of Dr. Stanislav Grof, be it transpersonal psychology, holotropic breathwork, things like that, along with our teacher Lenny's legacy. He's a really interesting psychologist and philosopher with a lot of really interesting writing, and most captivating lecturer I've ever become really close to. So we wanted to do both of those things. No intent of business, but it was a reaction to what we were seeing in the psychedelic scene being mostly boring, sorry researchers, clinical research. When Kyle and I were coming from the perspective of all of this had been done already, and it's tragic, we need to do it all over again. More so than exciting, we have to do it all over again. And you see that today in some of the rhetoric around should MDMA be approved or not. And it's very similar discussion to when we got started. So over time, we started offering courses. We wanted college kids to have an easier time in college because they were going to use but didn't have any mentorship or education. You know, you come out of high school and then you start throwing acid or mushrooms in your head. And what do you have other than like some cartoons? Like you don't know what to do. You have no cultural container. So this is around creating a safe cultural container for the youth. And I thought that was really meaningful. And eventually doctors and therapists started showing up. We started getting a little embarrassed that doctors and therapists were coming to that program. So we started developing a more clinical program, navigating psychedelics for clinicians and therapists. Kyle, I believe at that point was in grad school as we were developing that. So he had already finished a transpersonal psychology undergrad and was working on his master's for clinical psychology or clinical mental health. That's how we started. Then Vital, which I'm sure most people have heard of at this point, is our 12-month training program. And that came out of a response to analyzing the CIIS program and the MAPS program and realizing that there was a lot of room to develop a improved training program that was more comprehensive, wasn't so mono-drug, was really at its core very anti-drug war, which I think is a really important component. I say anti-drug war. I also at the same time mean it's a decolonization exercise as well, that people don't necessarily tie in with that space, but it's a really important one. And yeah, that's what we've been up to other than producing hundreds and hundreds of podcasts, events, and other online courses and all sorts of stuff. Yeah. So we're hoping to make a dent and be a hedge against the potentially over-moneyed interest that might come in the near term. I'm more concerned with big pharma, like Johnson & Johnson, for instance, than I am around these smaller startup psychedelic companies. I think those are mostly good, expensive experiments for sure, because a lot of them keep failing, but I think they're worthy nonetheless. So that's me in a nutshell. Hope that wasn't too long.
No, it was perfect. I love what you said about like this idea of having a safe cultural container was a motivator, I guess. Yeah, an intention behind Psychedelics Today. And I want to circle back to that. But first, I want you to tell the listeners what you mean when you say anti-drug war.
Number one, I think it's giving people an appropriate history. Kyle and I were recently published in a book along with Lenny Gibson around the history of the drug war. The book was The Philosophy of Psychedelics. We were at first contacted to write about the ethics of the American drug war, and then we just started writing about the drug war more generally. I want people to understand the why and how it happened, and then I want them to understand like how it's still impacting their lives and their approach to drugs and their drug safety today. People in the psychedelic movement are operating in a really serious information vacuum because of the drug war. And if the drug war never happened, prohibition never happened in the same way it did, MDMA psychotherapy would have been a thing 30 years ago, or 20 years ago. And LSD and psilocybin interventions would have been interventions all through the, late 70s. And imagine the degree of suffering that the planet would not have had as a result of that, not to mention the impact of the drug war on all sorts of populations. For instance, African American population in America is so disproportionately charged and impacted by the drug war in terms of incarceration and much more, harassment included. And when a parent in African American goes to prison around this, the family is then impacted for 7 generations in a really negative way. And this is a really broad issue and highly racist, highly inappropriate, and something that needs to stop immediately. And then the third part being contaminated supply. How many people are dying from contaminated drug supply due to fentanyl and all these other similar molecules and novel molecules coming along? Because we can't buy these things at the store and hold manufacturers accountable for quality, there's a lack of ability to prosecute people for fraud or harm, and same thing in the facilitated sessions. Like we can get abused in a psychedelic session and there's next to no recourse. For instance, the Center for Consciousness Medicine or whatever that group is from San Francisco that got all busted up because they were abusing a lot of people, they're somehow still free despite all the abuse. Best I can tell, I don't think they're in prison and they're still operating. So it makes me uncomfortable that even today, 2024, hardcore abusers are getting away with it because of the drug war. And the next thing I always jump into is just how strong-handed the United States was in exporting this globally. And America is not the hardest hit. There's countries out there where if you get caught with drugs, you get executed. And this is because of the United States war on drugs. Duterte, it was one of Trump's buddies in the Philippines or something. He was like bragging about how many people he was able to murder as a result of drug possession. And Trump was super into that, which is a little nerve-wracking for me.
Yeah, because it's not like when we're talking about psychedelics, it's not, yes, it's about the drug, but it's also about consciousness expansion. So yeah, it's like putting people in jail for pursuing the expansion of their consciousness or murdering someone or killing someone because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I also like to deflate psychedelics a little bit too, because we did a piece recently called Harming While Healing. And it was about this rhetoric a lot of us have in the psychedelic space around just how amazing psychedelics are. They're amazing. I really like them quite a bit. And I think they have a lot of hope for us. At the same time as we do that, and say, no, these drugs are special and different and better, which in some ways they are, in some ways they are not, we contribute to the narrative that other drugs need to be criminalized and people need to keep going to prison. Think about, for instance, Canadian reservations, Indian reservations where people are perhaps consuming methamphetamines and what like that kind of government incursion would look like and the penalization there, which just, it doesn't seem fair given everything they've gone through. And it's not fair for anybody. Like we should have a lot of bodily autonomy. And again, less of a Canadian issue, maybe more of an American issue. And we don't have much bodily autonomy here in America and the autonomy to do with what our psyche and body that we will. And it's a really complex thing. Psychedelics included here. Not everybody needs to go on the mystical quest, but if they choose to, they should be allowed to. Well-informed, hopefully.
Yeah, and should also be allowed to just consume because they want to consume. I guess that's a very Carl Hart approach with his like whole idea of psychedelic exceptionalism that you were just speaking into.
I'm very much a devotee. Our episode with him was like life-changing for me.
I was on email with him and he said he was going to come on Modern Psychedelics and then I guess he got busy.
He's very busy.
Yeah, still holding out for that. Yeah, I really enjoyed his book and his work. It definitely opened my eyes a lot to, I like the word that you use, deflate psychedelics a bit. I think it's really important because the more that we inflate them, the more people go into them with really high expectations and treat them as a sort of panacea. And I see it all the time working with clients who do journeys and just, it's something that I love to see more conversation around. So I guess that kind of like the hangover of the drug war and the ongoing drug war I guess that kind of leads into safe cultural container, because it's hard to create that with drug war narrative. Can you speak into what you mean by a safe cultural container? What does it mean, and how can we get there as a culture and a society?
I was talking to a sociologist friend who works at a university somewhat recently, and she had this line: maybe psychedelics are not really good drugs for people who live in very impoverished environments. Maybe methamphetamine and heroin is a superior drug for them, given their cultural container. Which was like kind of challenging for me to hear, but at the same time, I wanted to really understand what she was saying. And LSD or mushrooms, MDMA, could be a really superior drug if you're at a university with a beautiful yard and woods, and you have enough money where you can, buy yourself a little bit of privacy or something like that. There's cultural context that goes into that calculation of superior drug or not superior drug, is what I took away from it, right? That's, I think, part of it. Cultural container, right? So think about the depth of the container of the Native American church. Like those rituals are very long, like decades, many decades long. This is a newish tradition, everybody. This is not a very ancient tradition, what they're doing at NAC, but it's an adaptation of their ancient traditions. So I think that's really important to note. But that's a really solid cultural container where they actually know what to do with people if they're having a hard time after or before or during. An inappropriate cultural container could be something like eating 10 hits of acid and going to a Taylor Swift show where they probably don't have that kind of container ready for you, versus going to some sort of electronic festival where Dance Safe is there or Zendo is there. And there is a cultural awareness of what's going on with the people who are attending, because there's a very large percentage of people who are going to be consuming psychedelics or other drugs there. And
hopefully
we know
not
it.
10 tabs, but
some people are doing it. It's around, is there, a judgy grandma? Is there a cop that could give you some sort of fear, which contributes to that sense of unsafety? Is there like embarrassment, or is there full acceptance of what we're up to and doing, right? So even in modern psychotherapy, say, for example, I find some therapist on BetterHelp and I want to start talking about my psycho-spiritual path and my interest in occasional partying with these things. They're not going to know what to do with me. And in fact, oftentimes feel very unsafe working with me. I've been fired by a number of therapists, which is fascinating to me. Could be more about me than them. I'm not going to judge. I know I'm complicated, but having a good cultural container is, I think, really essential and will continue to improve in America as folks like yourself and us at PT keep creating media, keep getting people hopefully talking about these things, hopefully getting them interested in getting an education. It's like programs like we offer. There's plenty of other programs. There's plenty of free programs, plenty of good YouTube videos. But you want to find the right people too, right? There's some kooky folks out there that might not be telling you science-based information that could conflict with actual scientific findings. Not like science is the be-all and end-all. It's a little frail, but it's one of the best information sources we have today. So yeah, I'm hopeful and I'm working towards getting as many people literate on this topic as possible so that the world can see these things as somewhat normal. Again, deflate them. Yes, there's magic there, but there's magic everywhere. And this is just one of those access ways. And it's a tool there if we need it. And if it's the right tool for the job. That's another thing. Not every psychedelic is the right tool for every job, right? You don't want to consume ayahuasca before a Grateful Dead show. You don't want to do iboga, like a very big dose of iboga before going to EDC or something in Vegas. Like that was a very big mismatch. But there are substances that seem to work well. And depth of cultural container, I forget if I said this. Just imagine what the depth of the cultural container is at a Grateful Dead show, who they've been at it since mid to late 60s or something. And then the Fish scene, which has been at it since the early 80s. And there's other large groups of people, and similarly, that have held containers for a long time. I think one of the oldest is the Psytrance scene out of Goa. I think when the hippie scene was ending in America and Europe, I think a lot of people just landed there and had this really good conjunction with machines that could make music for days and days, unlike a band who could maybe go somewhere between 2 to 8 hours, maybe 12 if we're lucky. But, Goa Gill, like, let's do a 24-hour thing. And we're all here for the duration of whatever we're on. I'm assuming they were doing a lot of LSD. But yeah, there's deep cultural containers around psychedelics. And what we're living in the Western world does not have that. And finally, probably the most ancient one, Mike Crowley, a lama in the, I think, Tibetan Buddhist tradition, wrote a book called The Secret Drugs of Buddhism, talking about how it's quite likely that Tibetan Buddhism had a number of psychedelic drugs that they would use at certain phases of the development process.
Yeah. I love how you frame that in terms of like music culture. Like, yeah, this Taylor Swift crowd may not be the most psychedelically informed crowd, where probably wouldn't be the safest idea to consume psychedelics at that.
And no hate on Taylor Swift. Some beautiful music.
Yeah. They're taking from the rave kids with have you seen the bracelets that the Taylor Swift kids?
Really?
Yeah, they're doing like the candy bracelets from the rave scene.
There's worse things they could take.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, I love how you framed, as someone who's a big festival person, I love how you framed it in that way. Side note, I want to get back to the cultural container. Are you into psytrance?
I used to be very into psytrance. I had like probably starting in mid-high school, I was like super into infected mushroom and Goa Gill. I was like a little too hypey. I had no drugs at that time in my life either. I was just like psytrance. Oh my God. And very into it.
So like spiraling upward. It's like ascension. That's how I think of psytrance.
Right.
I can't get that into it, but there's been moments on LSD when I'm like, I get it.
I was driving by, I'm a huge infected mushroom fan still. I was cycling by them at Burning Man at one point. I think I was on 2CB with a bunch of friends. And I was like, oh my God, I really want to go see them. And then I roll up, I'm like, not for me. And I just start cycling away from one of my favorite bands. This is so ridiculous.
Because of the state you were in?
Yeah, it wasn't a good match. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And I still proceeded to have a good time. I'm just like, that's not for me right now.
Yeah.
And I think that's, learn from that, folks. It's okay to walk away from something if you're not feeling it, even if it's something you anticipated.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let's go back to the cultural containers. So yeah, I love how you put it in terms of festival culture or music culture. How do you see like a safe cultural container for psychedelic use in a society, like zooming out in the macro?
All right. A couple people started painting me as like a drug war anarchist or something. I forget the term they used, but I believe so strongly that the drug war needs to end and that it's incumbent on governments to keep us safe by allowing us to have a safe supply of these substances so we're not getting poisoned. Similar to how we buy acetaminophen or ibuprofen, and we can usually trust the dose. We can trust the purity. There's probably not too much dish soap inside each pill or whatever contaminant could be in there. I really believe we need access at that level so that people can know how much they're taking, know what they're taking. To support this point, there was a project by The Loop in the UK who implemented drug checking at a festival, 80% reduction in hospitals year over year by implementing drug checking on site, where people could just throw away bad drugs that they didn't want. They're like, yeah, I'm sure I could get high off this, but whatever, I'm just going to throw it out. And so all sorts of drugs, like people then knew what they were taking. They might not have known potency, but they at least knew the substance. And that's a big win. So imagine if we could just go to a store and there's no question, and or enabling some sort of underground network where people, are allowed to distribute and there's less tape, government regs and all that kind of stuff. I think there could be some issues there, but I'm more concerned with people going to jail and dying than overregulation of manufacture at this point. I'm sure that'll change in time. I want that. That's step one towards a safe cultural container. I want law enforcement and first responders like EMS and fire departments to be educated on this stuff. MAPS is doing some good work around that in Colorado, which is lovely. And then once we have broad education, a couple more years of big blockbuster hits on psychedelics, both in books and radio and TV and movies, I think we're going to keep developing as a culture around this and not shaming people so much. A lot of this comes down to shame, by the way. And then people can more intelligently choose when and how to do this stuff and talk to their healthcare professionals about it in a more reasonable way. The amount I've lied to my healthcare professionals makes me concerned about my health, that I can't necessarily be honest with these folks. You just did what at Burning Man? What? Kidding me? Sorry. But yeah, so it's a tough scene and we need to get through a lot of those things. We need folks to understand that there's many possible containers. One of my favorite episodes Kyle and I did was called Contexts of Use, where we talked about everything from raves to shamanic use, from clinical to everything else possible. And we don't even know yet all of the possible contexts of use for these things. So that's like a broad vision. The apex of the vision, and potentially the most important, isn't even psychospiritual for me right now. It's around how do we unlock the potential of psychedelics to help us combat the polycrisis, metacrisis, which includes climate, nuclear war, sea level rise, ecosystem destruction, habitat loss, species loss, all of these major things, healing communities, like how fractured are our communities these days? Big tech being a major contributor there. So like, how do we solve these problems in a real way and use psychedelics when interfaced with the human body to help us solve those things? And we have some good case studies from Palo Alto. I think Willis Harmon was the researcher working with Jim Fadiman there in Palo Alto on that. And thankfully, there's a group that just rebooted this in Texas called the Center for Minds. Bruce Damer is part of that whole network. Very excited to see what they're able to do.
Can you tell us more about what you're learning about how we can use psychedelics to, I think you use the word combat, some of these bigger social, cultural, global, environmental issues?
The research I always fall back to, which Bruce Damer is now picking back up with his organization, what they were doing was bringing in scientists, architects, chemists, and more with 2 to 4, I think, problems they were unable to solve in 9 months' time. And this is about technological advancement, really, and problem solving. They would consume, I think, 100 micrograms of LSD, which they, at that time, called a very small dose. I think it's a pretty robust dose. And they would lay down, headphones on, listen to some classical. And the idea was to be working on the problems through the come up, through the plateau. And at about an hour and a half, they would get up and actually start working on the problems on whiteboards and their paper, notebooks. They'd have all their resources there so they could work on stuff. I think I would have trouble seeing anyway, but they would be cranking out and solving everything they brought within a couple hours. Eventually, they would have to bring more problems to solve. And I think that is a very promising tale. So architects, chemists, and much more were solving problems like super fast. Imagine if we were able to deploy that to things around infrastructure resilience. So things like, how do we make a resilient rail network, resilient road network, more resilient and robust power networks? So like, how could we make solar 10x better or 10x cheaper? Similarly, battery technology, like how do we develop a microgrid instead of having one mono grid? So like every community could power itself and its neighboring communities. So if any one community goes down, for me, it's taking from permaculture design, taking from design thinking more broadly, and expanding and solving major technical problems to improve the core technologies that drive our culture, which is right now coal power, which isn't super great, apparently. And then could we 10x, 100x fusion, like fusion for power generation, or fission for that matter, and just how do we make fission way safer so we don't see more Fukushimas? And then I think we've come a long way in that regard anyway, but I think we still are always going to need more. And my hope is that we can, by developing these technologies further, implementing them rapidly, we can continue to do culture in a semi-normal sense, at least for the next couple hundred years, I hope. And then once we solve a lot of our international relations issues, hopefully we can consolidate and then become some sort of, beautiful global culture that's spacefaring in some helpful capacity, at least for curiosity. But, there's some major things we need to solve here. But, I think there's a major imperative to get multiplanetary too, on account of asteroid strikes and whatever else could happen. Nuclear war is probably as likely as a comet.
So the study you were referencing, I think it's in the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, right? That's that one that people can read
and
about.
I've talked to Jim Fadiman about it a few times, and it's a really compelling story.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad Bruce Damer's onto it. And what they're trying to do is pin down the actual science behind all of this. And as, in 5-10 years, they'll have a really excellent framework that can be deployed almost anywhere, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm imagining some sort of retreat-like experience, but for the intention of bringing minds together to solve problems. And maybe it's like a specific problem that a bunch of people from different disciplines are coming to and all working on together. Imagine how cool that would be if like they're all approaching one problem from different angles on the acid. Whoa, that would be cool.
So the psychotherapy aspect is still super important. One aspect of that for me is that in a relatively short period of time, it's projected that 1/7 of the world's population will not be able to live where they live today due to extreme weather, including heat and sea level rise. And the amount of trauma that we'll have to address as a result of that is going to be pretty intense. And there could even be, guilt. Like maybe we start feeling really guilty about, oh God, I didn't live cleanly enough and I contributed to this. So we might need it as well. So there's a lot left to solve here.
Yeah, I know.
And it's a big set of problems.
Yeah, even as we're having this conversation right now, I can just feel it in my chest. The weight of the world. Like we're in quite a pickle.
My biggest experiences was just like, how old was I? I was probably like 28. Okay. I don't really have a future. Like I'm going to die on account of this climate change stuff. And like all the stuff I was sold in the previous years is just not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is going to be pretty tough. Thankfully, I think the worst of it for me is a little far out, like maybe 15 years, but I don't know. It could be longer, could be shorter. I just hope we get through it as a species and with as much grace as we can.
Did you know that your problems don't come from the situations or circumstances themselves? Your problems are likely coming from how you approach them. More specifically, your problems might be coming from the level of consciousness that you approach them with. It's pretty simple. Here's how it works. Anytime something happens to you, you can approach the situation from various levels of consciousness. You can come from a low level of consciousness that perpetuates the problem and keeps you stuck, drained, hopeless, and under stress. Or you can come from a high level of consciousness that helps you move forward because you can more easily tap into creative solutions and access your intuition. The good news is that at any given time, you can choose how you show up and therefore have a massive impact on how your life unfolds. The trick is to be aware of all of the options available to you, which most of us aren't. We're stuck in our default modes, which is why most of us feel stuck and unable to move forward. But that job that you hate, your codependent relationship, or the numbing anxiety of not knowing your purpose in life can be the exact thing that moves you forward and gives you clarity as long as you're approaching it from a high level of consciousness. In my coaching program, I'll help you become hyper aware of your current approach and help you shift to higher levels of consciousness. By addressing those unconscious energy blockages keeping you stuck, we unlock flow, acceptance, peace, and joy in life. And this isn't woo-woo. I use a research-validated coaching method that's benefited thousands worldwide. So whether you're corporate or spiritual or both, this approach offers practical integration into daily life. And it happens to pair brilliantly with psychedelics. High consciousness living is achievable every day, not just during psychedelic experiences. Psychedelics surely illuminate the path, but it's our job to walk it every day. My coaching program will provide you with a grounded and operational way to integrate high consciousness into your daily life. I am currently onboarding new clients into my practice, so if you'd like to learn more about the program, visit modernpsychedelics.net/coaching. And if you're ready to do this work, go ahead and apply now and book a discovery call with me at modernpsychedelics.net/apply. I'll have both of those links in the show notes for you. All right, let's get back to the episode. Do you take that kind of classic psychedelic approach where you believe that what is needed to get us out of this pickle that we are in? I'm laughing at the word because pickle just doesn't even begin to describe the extent of this situation that we are in globally, all the things going on that I don't even have to list because I know everyone knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. Do you take a kind of a classic psychonaut approach where you believe it's that evolution in consciousness that is needed to get us out of it? What do you think it is about psychedelics and what they have to offer to help us get through things?
There's something around just how sick culture is. There's something about how sick we are as individuals, and then how difficult it is to see through the illusions. You're familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave?
Yes.
Yeah, very matrixy. It's pretty much everybody's just seeing these surface impressions. Somebody actually goes out and it's actually like literally shadow puppets. Somebody crawls up, goes above ground and sees the sun and sees the truth. It comes back down and says, oh, you guys aren't really seeing reality. You're just seeing like really surface level things. There's a lot more here to reality than just these shadow puppets on the wall. Everybody's, you're crazy. So there's, on one hand, I think we should look at the word apocalypse. Apocalypse not necessarily being like end of the world. Apocalypse as meaning what it really means, which is revealing, like we're revealing the truth. And there's something really interesting happening today where more and more people, it seems to me, are seeing how manipulated we are by gigantic forces. And the undue influence companies like BP Shell, Mobil Exxon, major other oil producers, the amount of PR muscle that the Saudi Arabia can influence the world with. And honestly, like people should do some reading on how much Saudi Arabia influences America. Like we can't really talk about climate very well because there's so much money coming against us from very wealthy groups due to oil. For a little while, I was calling NPR, which is our kind of Canadian, the equivalent to CBC, for instance. And I would call them National Petroleum Radio because it was like really clear to me they were taking a lot of money from oil groups. Finally, in the last 3-4 years, I've seen them step up their climate rhetoric. But it's, guys, it would have saved a lot more lives if you started 10, 20 years ago in earnest. And likewise with the larger political apparatus in America, would have been helpful 20 years ago. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know where hope comes from other than from each one of us and influencing our politicians to get in line and work towards saving the rest of us. In terms of trauma, like we need to clean up a lot of our trauma so we can see more clearly and be less reactive in unhelpful ways and understand better how we want to interact with each other and political leaders, business leaders, etc. With less trauma, we can make better decisions and have potentially more skillful actions. It's not necessarily the case that you just throw a bunch of psychedelics on it and your trauma's gone. It takes careful, deliberate work over time. And potentially psychedelics aren't for you. And potentially that much psychedelics isn't for you. Yeah, so it's seeing through the illusions a little bit more that are cast by really powerful forces. And then it's also cleaning up our own material so that we can be more authentic and impactful operators.
Yeah, I think that's aligned with that, what I was saying in the
classical psychedelic vision.
Yeah, the consciousness expansion, seeing the truth, removing the illusions. I love that you tied in the role of personal work and healing our own trauma, because we really do need to be able to clear all of that to see the truth and to expand our consciousness, using both of our kind of words here. And I love that, yeah, you're...
Briefly, one thing. I don't want people not to act without cleaning up their trauma. People should still be acting politically and otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not... Because this was the major schism between the Timothy Leary camp and the hard left of America during the 60s counterculture scene. The 60s counterculture, like hard left, criticized Timothy Leary's world for you're just escaping.
Yeah.
I don't super believe that, but I think that debate is really important for us to be aware of today.
Yeah, because it's like, what awareness or what perspective are you acting from if you're going out and trying to fix the world? If you're still traumatized and coming from that lens, then that's going to be a very different action or result than if you look at your own trauma first. So what I love about having you on the show is that your approach, and at Psychedelics Today, if you look at all your podcast episodes, they're a little bit more macro, I would say. And you even said yourself, like, you're less concerned about the psycho-spiritual stuff. I'm very much working on that level of individual psycho-spiritual kind of work. So where do you see the intersection between the two, society and culture, and the individual, and then the micro and the macro, the individual and the global? Like, how do those interact for you?
I wonder if there's some subtext here that I'm missing, but I love this because I'm very aligned with the concept that the individual is the kind of atomic unit of culture. The individual needs to be heavily respected. If we go historically and and look at cultures that didn't really appreciate that. We can see what Mao did in China, Stalin in Russia. The individual did not matter because they had such a robust plan that the individual was irrelevant. And I think that was extremely spiritually harmful for both countries. And they're probably, I for sure know China is experiencing that today, and I'm sure Russia is too. The amount of people that got killed of their own people in those two countries is very unconscionable. So I think we need to really lean into how important the individual is and work towards what is this collective future that we want together. I identify as politically confused, by the way, and quite publicly. I wish I had something I believed in other than I want people to be as healthy as possible and taken care of as possible. Like Buckminster Fuller might be like the guy I would have voted for most primarily. Super kooky, but he had the vision, and technologically and otherwise. We've had enough food to feed everybody on the planet for many decades, but we've not had the will to do. So people are dying. Sure, stock market keeps going up, but like people are dying and kids don't have enough food. Even in America, you're twisting people's arms to get kids fed in school. Like, how does that even make sense? It's a both and for me. It's the individual reflects the culture and vice versa. And culture reflects the individual in some way. Felt like you were hinting at the Hermetic axiom of as above, so below, as within, so without. And there's some gold there. It's something people should be thinking about here and there.
Yeah, that might have framed my question a little bit. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking you were saying. And I think there's something there. Like the more Robert Anton Wilson, who we were talking about before we recorded, he posited at one point in a radio interview that there's very likely more Buddhas alive today than there have ever been in the history of the planet. And I think that's a really helpful thought. And, we need as many as we could get. I don't super identify as Buddhist. I'm interested in Buddhist philosophy. I appreciate it. I think it's pretty beautiful. It's not necessarily for me. But I think, the idea of all of these people being more dedicated to the good of humanity than to themselves is really beautiful. And it's how do we get people's minds a little more straight so that we're not just stuck in this kind of weird wanting, inappropriate level of wanting and suffering, that we might have more joy elsewhere. Music festivals, for instance.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your answer. It's something that I think about all the time in this space because there's tons of people doing work with psychedelics at the individual level. There's tons of people like you who are wanting to apply it more to the macro cultural level. And I often see a hierarchy that no, we should only be focusing on individual healing. No, we should only be focusing on things that move society ahead. And it's something I think about a lot. So I like hearing people's perspectives. In my perspective, similar to what you said, I think both are important and both inform one another.
There's a theme, let's call it a meme in the psychedelic space right now, that nobody should really be healing until we fix all of our systemic issues. And to me, that strikes of Stalinism, and Stalinism being absolutely fascist. Any individual dissenter goes to jail or dies, and any action is justified to meet our collective ends. Any kind of harm to another individual is totally okay, which I think is not great. And you might be able to understand what I'm hinting at here. But there's major aggressive, violent forces at play in the psychedelic space. And I want more peace. I want more unity. I think it's always a both and. The idea of forcing an or in there is so crazy. It's just not. At the same time as we're learning and growing, we need to be making collective action as we're learning and growing. And by putting violence on people, blackmail, extortion, doxing, all these really outrageous actions that a lot of folks have taken part of. How are we still supporting some of those individuals?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sure between the two of us, we've seen some stuff behind the scenes of the psychedelic space. I can think of a few instances, but yeah, it's the chicken or the egg. It's probably one of the things that we will contemplate until the day that we die. Yeah, what comes first, the individual or society? This is getting really philosophical. But something fascinating to think about in the context of how do we introduce psychedelics into the greater society, right? How do we apply it to individual work, to social work? Yeah. I love thinking about this
I
stuff.
think we've got a lot of work ahead of us to get our shit together before we can be more broad. But we're going to be growing exponentially here for the next bunch of years, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Given desperation and all the media interest. Yeah, it's going to be tricky for whatever reason. I'm just thinking about spiritual debates in the psychedelic community and how aggressive they can become. And I challenged somebody on their definition of consciousness a year or two ago, and it was like, it's fireworks.
Wow.
It was crazy.
Was that a podcast?
And I was citing kind of William James's, I'm not going to mention which one, but yeah.
So it's on the air. Someone could find it if they wanted to. Yeah.
Yeah, and small fireworks, but it was fireworks for me. Yeah. I was pulling from William James and his definition of consciousness as more of function than a real thing. It's more of an abstraction and a function of multiple things intersecting than such a thing. But we might not be playing with the same definitions, and people don't want to slow down enough to even compare definitions.
And back to the and rather than or, right? Maybe it can be multiple things.
Yeah, or like consciousness is not the right term for us to necessarily be using, right? Mm-hmm. Like one of our philosophers that we really like, Alfred North Whitehead, who we were introduced to through our teacher Lenny, to do the philosophy he needed to do, he had to create hundreds of new words because old words carried too much cultural inertia. And we're doing some radical shit here in psychedelia, and we're not necessarily making up new words. We're fighting over what kind of drug should we call MDMA? Entactogen, empathogen, contactogen.
Psychedelic, yeah. You know who's good at that? Laura Dawn. She's great at coming up with these new words to
as long as it's helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the underground and what's going on there. Yeah. And yeah, the good, the bad, the ugly. Tell me what you see going on in the psychedelic underground.
So again, on account of the drug war, it's really hard for any kind of accountability to take place. I've seen many people try to implement all sorts of interesting methods and I've not seen anything really work yet. Largely, I'm very pro underground. Very pro. I think the underground needs to police itself a little more aggressively. When they see really bad behavior, they need to figure out ways to clean that up. So if you are an underground operator, I believe you have some sort of responsibility towards your peers who might be doing really nasty stuff. When I talk about this, I like to say there's a set proportion of the population who's a sociopath. There's a set portion of the population who's psychopath, narcissists as well. And I come from New England, like Boston, like a little outside Boston. I don't know if you remember much of this, but the Catholic Church had a bit of a child abuse problem for a little while, and it was very deep in the Boston area. So I like to make a little bit of an analogy here. It's like people with certain interests and predilections will go towards careers that give them that kind of access and power. And similarly in psychedelia, we have a good set of interested parties coming forward. I've had to deal with many of these people who I believe have threatened my freedom and my ability to operate many times. One guy just I was critiquing him just because I thought his rhetoric was really harmful, so I would publicly critique, and then he would threaten suicide and blame me. Joe Moore is the reason I'm killing myself. Did it like 50 times. The first time it happened, I was on a psychedelic retreat in Jamaica working with some clients. I'm like, how am I going to handle this from Jamaica? So I called the police a few times. I was like, I'm out of the country. This guy just claimed he's going to commit suicide and it's my fault. Good luck, and that sucked. And it was going for years. And this is just one of many situations. And people don't like getting critiqued. I sometimes like getting critiqued. I just hope it's a useful critique I can grow with, as opposed to a worthless critique. So underground, there's a lot of wisdom there. Prohibition happened. A lot of these operators just stayed and kept doing what they were doing. They just had a less safe supply and no legal recourse in the possibility that they would get incarcerated or lose licenses or lose their kids if they got caught doing this kind of work. So they were doing it at great cost and risk to them, largely. And in a lot of these people, there is no break, right? They've been doing this stuff since the mid to late 60s. And I find that really impressive. So you can find these underground groups that have decades, many decades, in some cases probably centuries of collective experience that we should be learning from. And still today, it's a little too risky for a lot of these folks to come forward with their wisdom. Another avenue, like I was talking about before, this is Francois Borzada, her own Grossbard case where they got in big trouble for a lot of abuse scenarios. I speculate that there is some drug distribution happening from the stories I was told. I don't know 100% on. They didn't get in trouble. There was minimal accountability, and they designed a system where a lot of the people they were working with were afraid to come forward and share their stories because the organization had a good amount of data on them breaking the law with them. And think, Scientology and auditing, for instance. Oh, let's have a really robust file on everybody. So we're insulated because we have all the blackmail in the world we need. Maybe that's not how Scientology does it. I don't know. That's my perspective. But, bad actors can be really compelling to be around. Starting a cult, in my perspective, is really, it's almost formulaic at this point. You need the right players in place, but we have the science of cult building pretty clearly spelled out. So anybody that wants to do it can do it. I hope it's a really helpful one and not a harmful one. And for clarity, the metric there is there's a measure you can take on high demand groups. That's the term of art in the science aspect of this. But shadows breed weird molds, weird, potentially toxic things can grow in these like really fertile environments. And I'm thinking of some cases I've heard around Boulder where perhaps some people were doing underground work and then with a licensed facilitator, like an actual licensed therapist, and then something happened. And then the actual sitter went bananas and tried to get this person's license pulled, tried to really out this person as a problematic player in the space. And to me, created more toxicity and broke a lot of rules. And this is why I think underground communities really need to have frameworks set up for handling stuff like this carefully outside the scope of the law, because we can't really trust the law to actually even judge these cases well. So I've been thinking about how we can solve this kind of underground problem using tech. And I think there's some sort of interesting encrypted blockchain solutions where we could actually, people could be on like this, I don't know, call it like the Boulder Blue Jays or something. And you have 20 facilitators as part of this cohort. If there's bad behavior, people can mutually vote people off of that island and put record on their, like, I hate to get too technical, but the term is soulbound token. It's okay, you own this thing and this now has all these records on it. So there's ways that we could like mutually report, mutually share that data and keep it encrypted so that law enforcement can't get a hold of it or other bad actors can't get a hold of it. So I think there's ways in which we could create those sorts of professional accountability communities. But I think for now, it needs to be at a smaller scale before we start saying.
And then educating the public about how that works would be like people like me who don't understand blockchain.
It would be like a consumer thing, browser based with passwords. And like that community could see how it, show you how it operates and have their like collective guidebook.
That's very creative. Did that come to you in a psychedelic session by chance?
It was probably coffee.
Okay.
No, I wish it was psychedelic.
It's always creative. Yeah.
Yeah. I wish I could stop thinking. But that's not lately.
For those of you who are listening to this, Joe has, I don't know, it looks like at least 100 books on his bookshelf behind him. So very well read. Plethora of information in your brain. Yeah. Viva la underground, as we say. Yeah. A huge supporter of the underground as well. Also recognize the shortcomings of it.
So the less severe the law is, the less deep the shadows, and the more we can tell these stories publicly and bring people
so true
the accountability we need.
So true.
And the drug war, and that solves the underground problem in a real way.
And then there's also education, right? Educating underground facilitators. Is that what inspired Vital to be built, or one of the things that inspired Vital?
Yeah. Again, we saw a few shortcomings that we thought we could do better with in the existing landscape. Particularly, we analyzed, I think, IPI, CIIS's psychedelic program. Janice Phelps developed that one. And then, oh God, Integrative Psychedelic Institute or Integrative Psychiatry Institute, maybe. They're another Colorado-based program. And, you know, IPI, CIIS, and MAPS were like, okay, let's look at all these things. What can we do better? We come from the tradition of Stan Grof, who he's responsible for more psychedelic or more LSD sessions than any other individual alive. He's given more LSD in a clinical capacity in inpatient facilities and in outpatient and other psychedelics as well. So we come from his school of thought, and we're like, we don't really see all of his insights included. And we're kind of, again, a yes and organization. I hate to say his name out loud, but like even a little informed by the work of Ken Wilber in terms of integral theory. So I think operative terms there are transcend and include. So let's learn from the past. Let's not throw it out, but let's transcend the past and keep doing better. And it's like things are often true at their own level, for instance. Using a lot of these things, building out a more holistic curriculum, I think what we've developed is almost more like a liberal arts degree in psychedelics than, okay, now you can go facilitate MDMA or ketamine now that you know this stuff. We wanted to be a lot more big tent, a lot more inclusive, because we'll have psychiatrists, anesthesiologists, NPs, PAs, therapists, LCSWs, all, like social workers. So we'll have all these clinical folks, and then we'll have yoga teachers, underground guides who've been operating for 10 years plus. We'll have people from other programs. Like when the school I was talking about before collapsed in San Francisco, we had a lot of people come over, and they just didn't have a home. They wanted to finish their education. I think we were calling them refugees, and we gave them like big discounts to jump into our program. And I thought that was really awesome because we had all of their experience and lived experience, and we could challenge what they were taught or include it. So it was, what was it? This is our 4th round that we're enrolling right now. So when we started, we just said, can we do this? Can we create the best training program that we can imagine? We did it. What I like to come back to is Stan Grof, Christina Grof's holotropic breath work. The training is 2 years minimum, and there's no drugs. And many training programs are only 9 weeks, 6 months. So we were informed by that whole frame, which I think is a really good foundation to say, okay, we really need to be training people very rigorously if they're going to be doing anything at any kind of standard. Vital is different because it's not explicitly a facilitator training program. It's let's give you a very broad view, and you're probably going to have better facilitation skills than you would from other programs, but that's not what we're teaching. We are of the opinion that the more broad your education is, the more inclusive your education is, the better you will be as an operator of any kind in the space, from, somebody who does integration work as a therapist after or coach after, to the person that answers the phone at the retreat center or does the emails or whatever. There's a lot here that people can then apply to whatever path they're choosing to do. So we've seen people enter grad school, start businesses, create all sorts of interesting networks that I probably shouldn't talk about. It's fascinating to watch because we want to enable people and empower them to choose their own path here. And it's very Wild Westy these days.
Yeah, one of my coaching clients is going through the current cohort. So I got to hear a little bit about that from her.
Love that. I met somebody the other day who went through our Navigating Psychedelics program, and I think the second cohort of the Clinicians and Therapists edition. And now she's doing some super intense state level work around a legalization program, state level legalization. And they went through Navigating Psychedelics. I'm really proud of that kind of stuff. I'm like, oh my God, you now are changing the politics in a really meaningful way for your state.
That's so cool. What are people learning inside of Vital? Can you give us a brief rundown of the curriculum? And I guess, is there like learning objectives, or like what can people expect from it?
The structure is, I'll do the structure and then I'll tell you the content. So people come to an all Vital lecture once a week. So we'll try to find some world-class talent to teach you about XYZ topics. We've had some amazing folks. Luis Eduardo Luna, Joe Tarfur in the past has taught for us in those. We've had some really major lecturers and scientists and therapists as our kind of like big lecture. And then there's a Q&A period after that where you can ask all your questions. Later in the week, there's a small group. You get broken up into a small cohort group. So you develop relationships with those folks over the year. And you have 2 study group leaders that'll be supporting you. So you can discuss that and or other material in those meetings. And then there's an online community website where you can talk with alumni and current students quite actively. And we don't censor too much, but No illegal stuff on our platform. Just go elsewhere, please. But yeah, then in terms of the content, 4 major categories: prep, harm reduction, clinical evaluation and assessment, space holding and navigating the psychedelic experience, psychedelic integration and therapy, inner work and embodiment. So those are the 4 major components. We've added some specializations to the certificate program, calling these 5 of them here. So microdosing, spiritual emergence, which is a really important topic that the world is not ready for, what we're going to see in the next couple of years in relation to this. Somatics and trauma, super important.
Yeah, with all that 5-MeO that people are doing. Yeah.
It's going to be wild. It's going to be a really wild few years in psychedelics, everybody. I hope you're ready. Yeah. If we want, we can do my spiritual emergence talk after I run through this if you want. I have some proposals. Then we have depth and Jungian perspectives, because Groff in a lot of ways is like a synthesis of Freud and Jung and everything else in the European psychoanalytic tradition, and in a really beautiful way. And we like to really make sure people understand the depth traditions. So Freud, Jung, etc. And thankfully, Johanna on our team is a Jungian scholar, which is always amazing to have her around for that. And then finally, regenerative business and leadership, which I think is really important for people coming out that actually want to develop something.
It sounds like a degree. It sounds like you could take this as, 4 separate courses at a university. Who knows? Maybe one day. Maybe one day.
Don't reveal my ambitions.
Okay, yeah. Who should apply for Vital, and who is Vital for? What are you guys looking for in applicants?
I like to say it's for anybody with a professional interest in psychedelics. So anybody from a doctor who just wants to be able to talk to their patients better, because people are going to be coming in and asking about psychedelics regularly. And do you want to be, absolutely ignorant as a clinician to this topic? I think the answer is no. But generally, clinicians are just like, let me go back and I'll come get you an answer in 10 minutes. But what if you had all these answers? More people now than ever are using psychedelics, and you should be prepared to interface with these folks. If you're working with populations that might be users or interested, like chronic pain sufferers are going to be using psychedelics a lot more in the next handful of years. And I've had some interesting fingers in the pot on that one. You can also look at non-clinicians. So people like yoga teachers who their people are going on ayahuasca retreats already, or mushrooms, or whatever it is. Like, where are psychedelics being consumed and what people interface with them, either in the experience, before, after, during. So I like yoga teachers, I like massage therapists. I think they're really interesting folks to have in the mix here. Not only do I think bodywork could be really helpful in psychedelic psychotherapy or psychedelic sessions, but I think for integration, moving stuff in your body around afterwards, maybe even before,
or even mid-retreat,
could be really helpful.
Like between sessions.
Right? Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Say you're doing a couple sessions. Absolutely. Yeah. Just keeping the energy moving, loosening up the tight zones in your body. Bodywork is very core to Stan Groff's holotropic breath work. That's a big portion where we believe in very strongly in it. Not only do we believe it theoretically, but we believe it because we have lived experience with it, doing it to people and receiving it in many different ways. Really, anybody, again, with a professional interest. So it could be anybody from a doctor, therapist, yoga teacher, massage therapist, to a psychic, to somebody with interest in investing in the space or starting a retreat center.
Do you have coaches?
Even politicians or staffers could be really helpful. What'd you say?
Do you have coaches in there?
We have plenty of coaches joining us, which is a big segment of our student population. What we've noticed a pattern of, and this is not something we necessarily encourage, is a very big personal decision. We've seen physicians, therapists, social workers drop their licenses so that they can do certain kinds of work that they feel more passionate about. I think there's a lot there.
I feel like that's becoming more common.
Imagine how useful. I almost try to push back against that sometimes, but just imagine the therapist or doctor who's super well informed, who chooses not to facilitate and do the edgy stuff, and as a result maintains a really powerful position in culture and can continue to steer politics around this in the right direction.
That's why I always say we need everyone, all hands on deck with this movement. The more diverse.
Even accountants, right? Accountants, marketing professionals. Like, I would be more inclined to work with people who have had a bunch of experience.
Yeah.
and understand our world a little bit better.
Yeah. Amazing. I love the diversity, and I love how it is just the come as you are, and we're all just going to learn about psychedelics together, no matter who we are, where we come from, or how we're going to apply it. That feels, I don't know, there's something special about that I haven't seen in other psychedelic training programs.
There's a problem in contemporary medicine where physicians aren't always allowed to be or feel human.
Yeah.
And that cuts both ways, right? With like trust and rapport, and also ability to hear things appropriately. We've had students in our program who are physicians who are in just a room with not all clinicians, which is edgy for some clinicians, say, I feel like I've grown so much, including I feel like I know how to be human again.
Wow.
Because it's I feel bad for physicians because they get beat up by their training, by people, the anti-medicine movement, like all sorts of really wild places. They're getting beat up. And allopathic medicine had to fight really hard to get its position in culture. It wasn't just like they didn't have to fight. They had to fight really hard, if you look at the history. So we should be like culturally aware, but we should also be culturally aware that why would we want a doctor in training, not even a super experienced doctor, to not sleep for 24 hours straight and be prescribing and treating people for 24 hours straight? We know that after, 18 hours, our cognitive capacity is effectively like we're drunk. So like legally drunk level cognition doing medicine, like we as a culture need to push medicine to cut that crap out because people are getting hurt. So we need to just keep improving.
Yeah.
All over the place here, and cutting people slack and having compassion, but also helping them see this stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing that you've been able to cultivate a space where people feel human and can just explore their next steps and explore how they want to apply that knowledge. So congratulations on building this. I'm sure it's just going to keep building. If people listening are interested and they want to learn more and maybe apply, can you tell them a little bit about the next cohort and where they can learn more?
Yeah, you can learn more at vitalpsychedelictraining.com. You can, easier is probably psychedelicstoday.com. Follow the links up top to it. And then if you're interested in the timeline or to learn more about the program, there's some informational material there. There's videos, testimonials. I think we have a 40-page brochure you can ask for. We might even just have it right on the website. You can learn about the timing and the schedule. We're trying to get more in line with the academic calendar year. So I believe our start date is September 17. And we can get more information about you if you want to apply for the program from that site. There's like an apply here button, no fee, and just apply. And we'll be in touch and talk you through it. And yeah, it's about a year. It's pretty intense, but it's transformative. It's going to give you a community and a network that you might not have, and hopefully a lot more hope. Because that's what I want to be doing, is selling hope. I think like when I watch the news, I'm nervous. And who's selling me hope these days? I have to sell it myself, I guess.
Amazing. So people can learn more. We'll have that linked in the show notes. Is there anything else you want to leave the listeners with today?
I want people to understand how powerful they are and how influential individuals can be. And yes, it's great to find a role model and be all about that person, but it's, I think, more appropriate to be all about you and you being the superhero of your story, especially if you have a team of people who you're conspiring with to make whatever change you're working on making. And I really just want people to be empowered to improve their lives and the lives of their community and peers. Hopefully just take more care with what they do in the world and how they do it. Yeah, the more deliberate, intentional we can be with our actions, the more we can work towards righting the ship here. Planet Earth, the biosphere might be a little edgy for a bit. Gotta see what we can do to help each other and the planet.
So in line with the ethos of modern psychedelics and everything we talk about here. So a beautiful place to end. Thank you so much. It's been so awesome to drop in with you, like OG psychedelic podcaster. on modern psychedelics. Yeah, I guess we didn't mention that. You guys were such a huge inspiration for me to start my own podcast. And when I was researching podcasts and what was going on in the space, it was like you guys and the Third Wave podcast. And I was like, I think there's a space for me here to talk about more like personal transformation type of stuff. So yeah, we're all out here doing it together. I love it.
That's right. Here comes everybody.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Joel.
All right. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for listening to and supporting the show. To stay in touch, sign up for my mailing list, which can be found in the show notes or on modernpsychedelics.net. If this episode sparked something within, please let me know by leaving a review of the Modern Psychedelics podcast on Apple and Spotify. This really helps to share these messages with those who need them, which is the whole reason why I do what I do. And if you haven't already, come join the ongoing conversation over on Instagram with other beautiful souls. We have an incredible and conscious community over at the handle Modern Psychedelics. And don't forget that the work begins after you come back down to earth. And I'm standing shoulder to shoulder, doing it with you.